If this is taken away and it's left up to the states, like, how are you going to support my kids? Where is the accountability going to be?
President Donald Trump says he plans to shut down the Department of Education. So what will happen to this IDEA funding?
What we're not sure of is without the enforcement, without the guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed, what do states need to be doing? What do they need to be looking at?
It's just more of an opportunity for people to have a choice to get the best fit for their student, for their education. So once they leave the education system, they can be successful.
Oh my God.
And they him-hawed, and they said, well, we just don't have the money. And I said, well, how much money do you need? And they said it was about $5 million, including some communications things. I wrote the resolution that day, and I think they had the money within a week or two.
This is a Your Voice, Your Future town hall. Crisis in the classroom.
In Tennessee, the schools are facing a perfect storm of challenges. This year, Nashville's school faced major safety issues with over 500 students arrested statewide under new mass violence threat laws. They have also expanded security measures, including more schools resource officers and active shooter drills. Meanwhile, only 39% of Nashville's third graders are reading at grade level, and over a dozen schools are on the state's priority list for low performance. Today, we dig into the challenges facing these schools and crisis in the classroom. I'm Armstrong Williams. Metro school leaders under fire for years accused of being too slow to do anything to improve school security. That criticism resurfaced in January after the deadly shooting at Nashville's Antioch High School. Fox 17 News' Dennis Ferrier has investigated Tennessee school security for 6 years. He joins us now with a disturbing pattern for Metro Nashville schools.
If you look at Nashville Public Schools' commitment to school safety, you can see a pattern. MNPS resists doing something, something happens, they take action. Something happens again, they resist doing something, and then they finally take action, but always short of what the experts recommend.
After the Uvalde shooting and complete school safety failure there, every school district in the country was forced to look at its own safety plan. The call across the country, an SRO in every school. Many did just that, but Nashville Public Schools resisted, adding a few here and there, but refusing to put SROs in elementary schools. Schools director Adrian Battle said it was bad for small children to be around an armed police officer every day.
I think this is an appropriate balance between the desire for added security and safety and collaboration with the police department while not risking the criminalization of childhood behavior by using a policing response to incidents instead of our restorative approach.
Director Battle resisted SROs in elementary schools for years. Finally, just this fall, MNPS started to put SROs in elementary schools. Currently, there are not enough police officers to fill the positions. Many school districts also added ballistic film in 2022. After Uvalde, thousands of schools added that bulletproof glass element. School districts here in Tennessee added it as well, or at least considered it. But Nashville Public Schools was the only Middle Tennessee district to not even send a representative to a regional demonstration. They admitted zero interest despite its remarkable success rate.
Basic laminate you would see at any school, and me in a baseball bat. Oh my God, the vibration is unbelievable. Well, my hands are going to get, look, this bat is bent.
But then, after Covenant shooter Audrey Hale breached the school because it didn't have ballistic film, Metro quickly decided maybe it is a good idea. Metro Councilwoman Courtney Johnson.
And they him-hawed, and they said, well, we just don't have the money. And I said, well, how much money do you need? And they said it was about $5 million, including some communications things. I wrote the resolution that day, and I think they had the money within a week or two. So now they have ballistic film.
But not until after the Covenant shooting. Covenant school security is now provided by retired Nashville police officer
if you're moving down the hall
and security expert Bobby Young of Covert Results. Young provides security for 10 Middle Tennessee schools, and he says Nashville Public Schools does not understand its own customers.
The most important thing as a parent, if you're a parent and your child goes to a school, doesn't matter public, private, charter, your first thought every day before you put them on the bus or drop them off at school is their safety. That's the most important thing. If they're killed in an active shooter event, they're not coming home that night. Their education is not going to be great. They're not going to make a 3.0 or 3.8 or graduate if they're not alive. So their security should be the number one focus.
2 years ago, Metro Councilwoman Johnston filed a simple bill that asked the Nashville Police Department to come in and do a security assessment at each Metro school. No brainer, right? Guess what happened?
That resolution was lobbied against by the school board to the council members, and it failed.
MMPS and the council decided it didn't want the police to assess security. Bobby Young just can't believe it.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I mean, they need to be doing at least yearly assessments. What about penetration tests? Why don't we try that too and see how that works? How these systems that are set up, can they be defeated?
Which brings us now to the latest horror story. 16-year-old Jocelyn Escalante murdered in the Antioch High School cafeteria. Dr. Battle does not like metal detectors. She says they are unwelcoming and have unintended consequences. She said that more than once.
While past research has shown they have had limitations and unintended consequences.
But now they are in Antioch High School, and now they are proposed for the rest of Metro. But none of this would have happened without the death of this beautiful young girl. So much for unintended consequences, says former school board member Fran Bush.
And these things that are just excuses not to do the right thing because of whatever your personal beliefs are. When you ask parents, ask them, do they want a metal detector in their schools? Why don't you ask the children? The children's going to tell you, yeah, I don't want to sit next to my friend and he has a gun in his backpack and possibly at lunchtime, he's going to kill me.
We now welcome Nashville's Dennis Ferrier to the broadcast. Dennis, thank you for joining us for Crisis in the Classroom. You know, how do we—
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
How do we create an environment of safety, less cyberbullying, less bullying, kids not able to bring firearms and other weapons onto that sacred ground? What have we learned from across the country that works more efficiently, that protects the child and the environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, one of the things is you have to use the technology you have. And, you know, some of the school systems are geofencing the actual school. So when, you know, Steve makes a threat against me, they see the threat, they pull him before he ever gets to the door because they see the threat. Because let's face it, these kids, they're after attention anyway. So they're not coming in quiet. They're not coming in silent. They're not coming in under the radar. They're usually making some noise before they do anything. And that noise is social media. And if you can intercept them there, that's one way to do that. You know, and the bullying, you're right. The bullying leads to, I mean, we had a shooting here in Nashville, you know, this year. And, you know all about the shooting maybe, but you don't realize that same kid had brought a box cutter to school and threatened a child 3 months earlier and was allowed back in. So then you also have the question, Armstrong, like can we go back to maybe expelling or moving kids into, you know, some of the other schools if they do something like that? Because if you take them out with that box cutter, and we all know from 9/11, the box cutter is a serious weapon. He's never in that gun, he's never in the school with that gun.
You know, I think it's a little surprising even to debate if a kid comes up with box cutters and then eventually 3 months later, what happens? You have to question, what is the school's emergency public safety plan? Are there not guidelines to deal with that behavior immediately?
Yeah, and there's not. You know, when you look at the expulsion policy, they're all loosey-goosey, and a lot of them say, well, you know, it's up to the discretion of the school, and you know, they're worried about dropout rate, they're worried about,
different things that maybe you and I have 4 kids. I want my kids to come home safe. Beyond safety, yeah, I want my son to get an A in, calculus. Not that I did, but I want him to get an A in calculus, but I want him to be safe first. The grades don't matter if he's dead. The grades don't matter. Like that little girl, that sweet little girl that died here, she had all kinds of dreams and aspirations, but she wasn't safe and she got killed. So it doesn't matter. That comes second. And, we see this. Our judges all over the country, you try to get into a courtroom in the United States of America and not go through a metal detector because the judges and the lawyers want to be safe. I don't understand why our kids don't get the same treatment. Are they not as important as somebody in a robe?
What is monitored? And are there security cameras on campus? And are they strategically placed?
Yeah, well, sometimes they haven't even been working the security cameras. And, the security cameras, they still have to be seen, right? And then there has to be a reaction. And if, you're over there breaking up a fight in band room and you're the SRO, how are you going to get across campus in time? You might be too late. Yeah, you might eventually get the person, but not until after they've hurt somebody. And, as far as and then can you imagine, you're the SRO and you're calling 911. So you're calling 911, you got a gun and you're looking for this guy and you're on hold on 911. The state of Iowa, of all places, they have a 2-way radio. And like I said, you got to be creative, right? So they have a 2-way radio in every school in Iowa. And that 2-way radio goes directly to 911. So I go click. Hey, we have an active shooter at Bates Middle School, and I'm going out with a gun to look for him. We need help now. No hold, no delays, direct. And that is not even an expensive thing.
Well,
so,
Dennis, what about before we get?
Owe it, I think, to the.
What about before we get to the emergency? Before we get to the crime, what about preventive measures that involve kids that whisper and tell stories about what they hear and what they've seen, and that we take it serious, so we never get to the point where there's loss of lives in that place?
Yeah, and that's the hard thing, because you hear the rumor, and do you act swiftly? Do you find the kid who's making the threat? Do you get him out of school? What do you do? I mean, you're absolutely right. Before we're actually in an active shooter situation, and that's what I was talking about, the geofencing. I mean, you have to monitor social media, and even if there's and it's so much more than schools. It's a rival football game, right? It's a homecoming dance. If you think there's a threat, you get a metal detector, you get an extra SRO out there, and you try to do what you can to stop it before it gets. Because I can tell you, with the people there are several incidents. There were a couple in Miami where someone brought a gun to school, and they heard that someone might bring a gun to school, so they had a metal detector, and the kid went out and dropped the gun in a trash can out front of the school, and of course was caught on camera and never shot anybody, because he didn't want to. Everyone knows metal detectors work. I mean, they just work, right? I mean, have you ever my gosh, they'll pick up your zipper at the airport, much less a gun. So they work. So we have seen cases across the country where these things have been thwarted, maybe not the kind of lead time you're talking about, with the cyberbullying and all that, but some states have put cyberbullying as a crime. You can be expelled for cyberbullying.
Well,
if you have the will to do that, and you're willing to take the pushback.
Well, I tell you, you really have great insights on this and terrific reporting. Dennis Ferrier, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Armstrong.
As we continue our discussion, we talk about school choice in Tennessee. What impact to our schools and students? Stay with Crisis in the Classroom, Tennessee. I'm Armstrong Williams. and welcome back to Crisis in the Classroom, Tennessee. I'm your moderator, Armstrong Williams. Private schools in Tennessee are getting ready for the start of the state's upcoming school voucher program. Tennessee's Education Freedom Act was passed earlier this year and goes into effect next school year. Right now, we know that 18 schools in our area have signaled up to be part of the program. In Hamilton County, those include Chattanooga Christian School, the Montessori School, and Brainerd Baptist School, among others. There's also 3 schools in McMinn County and Faith Haven Christian Academy in Bradley County. Today, WTVC's Meg Dahl talked to participating schools as well as opponents of the program.
An emergency meeting was called by the Tennessee State Education Board Thursday morning to vote on how to roll out the Education Freedom Scholarship Program.
Having the emergency rules in place throughout the spring and summer of 2025 will allow parents and schools time to make educational decisions prior to the 2025-26 school year.
However, the rush to start the program and lack of opportunity for public comment is causing concern for some representatives.
I just think when you rush through major programs like this that are going to cost Tennessee taxpayers over $1 billion a year in the coming years, I think the public deserves to have a say.
Chairman Clemens says by the time the formal rulemaking process comes around,
the train will have already left the station. Public input will be allowed under the law, but it'll be limited, and then they obviously don't intend to rely upon or give any good faith effort to comply with public opinion or input on this bill.
Belvoir Christian Academy is one Hamilton County private school that is participating in the EFS program. The principal, David Topp, says he thinks this will open up more doors for families.
It's just more of an opportunity for people to have a choice to get the best fit for their student, for their education. So once they leave the education system, they can be successful in.
Beacon Academy is another Hamilton County school taking part.
This is not to increase the students in our school. God's going to send the students to our school, whether they have ESA funding, EFS funding, vouchers, whatever. This is for families to have those opportunities.
Britt says they are already expecting 30 new students for the next school year, with at least half potentially being voucher students.
What we also understand is that current students attending our school could apply for those vouchers as well. So they don't have to previously have been in public school.
In Chattanooga, Meg Doyle, News Channel 9.
Joining us tonight is J.C. Bowman, the president of Professional Educators of Tennessee, and Fran Bush, who also ran for mayor, but is also a former Nashville School Board member. Let me welcome you both to our Crisis in the Classroom. How important is increased parental choice and participation in education? And I'll start with you, Ms. Bush.
Well, as you know, I was a former school board member, and I'm also a parent of 5 sons. So I've always been very involved with the education system here in our city and pretty much across the state. Parental involvement is one of the most important intricacies in a child's life. And if we don't have more parents that are supporting our students, this is where we're starting to see our crisis in the classroom. So it's really imperative. And also our own daycares that also has given me an opportunity to work with families, work with parents, right? So that way I can best instruct them on what to do as far as being a part of their children's education.
JC, how do we improve educational outcomes, particularly as we have this debate about school choice?
How do we improve it? We do have to have parental engagement. I think that was one of the key pieces to it. We've been missing that argument. Too many kids are basically not supported at home, and then they come to school and they're behind already from their peers. So we need to make sure that we're engaging with kids. That's why tutoring, mentoring, and some of these other options, particularly in some of our larger cities, are very important for what we do, Armstrong.
Ms. Bush, how do we prioritize low-income families and avoid what some people call segregation?
Well, this type of issue can be absorbed very quickly, right? Low income families, I came from a background that I was not rich. We were poor. However, we had the parental involvement that allowed us to have proper education, to be successful. I went on to college, got my degrees. So it's not impossible for low income families or children to have the same opportunities as any other child that may have wealth, right? So it is just important, again, the parental involvement and being able to say, this is what's going to happen to my child, right? I'm going to make sure that my child is going to get the education they need and be able to go on even to post-secondary school or have some type of trade now. So it's really not an excuse just because we have, families that are in low income situations, that opportunity is not there.
JC, how do you address the biggest argument for those who are strong advocates of pro-choice when we get into the diversion of funds?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue on the voucher movement is the fact that you feel like you're taking away and the creation of a second system. So how do you avoid that? I think it's got to be one system. We need to understand we're going to continuously change as we evolve. I think first graders today, kindergartners, are going to an entire different system than the seventh graders and eighth graders that are already there. The school system has got to change. Our schools are going to continue to change. And I tell people, one of the things that's really happened, Armstrong, that people have not picked up on is that our public schools have started even using, and Fran was a great advocate for that. One of the things we started talking about is the choice options that are already available in our public schools, and they will continue to increase.
Ms. Bush, obviously raising 5 sons, running for mayor, being on the school board, you gained so many tools in your toolbox, which is why you embrace school choice, but you also feel that it can even be better and more inclusive. If you could make tweaks about the voucher and the school choice movement, what changes would you make to enhance it?
Well, with the voucher, it's been such a big controversy with the voucher, and it's not really coming at a time that we really need any more funding taken away from public schools. We really need to understand that I am all about choice. I've always talked about choice because every child is not fit for the same type of education or outcome when it comes to their academia. So I've always been about pro-choice. However, during this time, we really need to focus on the number of children that need more support. And it goes back to what you said. It's a lot more low-income families that really need that support in order for their child to be successful.
JC, what does the long-term evidence tell us school choice versus public education?
Well, number one, a one-size-fits-all does not work for every child. We know we have differential learning, we have differential abilities of our kids, and so it would make sense that they have different paths that they need to take for education to be successful, each child. However, 90% of kids will always be in public schools. So that's the thing, we worry about the fear that public schools are going away. They're not, they're going to be here. And they will need to continue to evolve and change. But the bottom line is the research says that parents that are engaged, we have better students, and that's at every level, both public and private.
Ms. Bush, what are your thoughts on ESAs as entitlement programs?
It's one of those things that I want to make sure that all children have equal access. And by doing so, we have to make those type of options available, right? So we want to make sure that when we're talking about these type of different options, that it's across the board, and it's not just used for some and not all. And that's what I've always been concerned about when it comes to our students, that we want to make sure that the programs that we are offering, that it is going to touch these children and not just be there in funds just sitting. We want to make sure that it is moving in the right direction for education.
But we both agree that the ESAs are not government assistance. I think we both agree to that. And they are government authorized savings accounts controlled by the parents for the purpose of investing in their children's education, JC.
Well, and I want to flip something a little bit. I want to say something Reagan said, Ronald Reagan said, government does not solve problems, it subsidizes them. So hold that thought for a minute, because one of the things I want to come back and say to this, on ESAs, yes, the parents pick the schools. And by the way, ESAs are a better route, in my opinion, than universal vouchers, because they at least had an accountability system built into them in Tennessee, whereas they did not have with universal vouchers an accountability system, which I think we would have liked to have seen. I tell people all the time, you will see more accountability come into the system like Florida has done. Florida has put more accountability into their system. So eventually in Tennessee, we'll put more accountability into it, because when you spend taxpayer money, you're going to have accountability, no matter where it is spent.
Should that money come with strings attached, Ms. Bush?
Yeah. I mean,
I'm talking about the government.
just like JC was saying.
I'm talking about the government mandated tests with Common Core.
I mean, we want to see results. That's exactly what we want to see, right? When we have these ESAs and these type of programs that is going to tie funding or tie money to our education system, absolutely it should be. It should come with some type of accountability. It should come with expectations, because that's how we see growth. That's how we measure to see if it even works.
JC, is that the accountability and responsibility that you're speaking of?
Yes, a little bit, and particularly back to Common Core. Tennessee supposedly did away with Common Core, but you specifically nailed it, because Common Core hasn't gone away. It is still very much part of our curriculum. And by the way, I'll point you to a school in Memphis that proudly puts on their thing. We have Common Core and offer that, and so yes, I think Tennessee standards are not being taught in Tennessee in a lot of places. And I think we need to go back. Whatever the standards that the state wants to adopt is fine, but they need to be measured. And whatever period is, and whatever those tax dollars go, we want to make sure every kid can read, write, and do basic math. And if they can't do that, we failed them.
Crisis in the classroom. We're coming back with our panel. We're going to turn our attention to the closing of the Department of Education. I'm sure that Ms. Bush and Mr. Baldwin have much to say about that and the long-term consequences, and also maybe the benefits. So that when we return on Crisis in the Classroom, Tennessee. If the Department of Education closes, what impact would that have for our schools in Nashville and Chattanooga? We'll look into that next. Stay with Crisis in the Classroom. Parents want to know what impact will Tennessee schools feel if the Department of Education closes. Thank you for staying with Crisis in the Classroom. I'm Armstrong Williams. Changes in education were up for discussion with Hamilton County's commissioners, with President Donald Trump signaling his intention to dismantle the federal Department of Education. Some commissioners were concerned how this would affect education in Tennessee. This comes in the aftermath of Governor Bill Lee's Educational Freedom Act passing the General Assembly. One commissioner claimed Tennessee had a poor track record on public education. WTVC's Lily Butler has more what commissioners had to say about the future of education.
The education of our future, of the kids for our future, is too great an issue than to wait.
President Trump has voiced his intention to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education, saying he wants the states to run schools.
What would happen if suddenly we didn't have the education department, the Department of Education?
Commissioner Greg Beck brought this into question at the Hamilton County Commission meeting. He said there needs to be a plan in place at the county level.
Is anybody doing any talk or any committee talking about doing any thinking or putting any numbers together?
Some Hamilton County residents are worried about leaving it up to the state after state lawmakers passed school voucher programs.
Look at the bills that are coming from our state right now, then we can see where the priorities are, and that's not with our public schools.
Megan Gilbert lives in Chattanooga and works for a nonprofit that supports education reform. She said Tennessee has already shown it doesn't represent what the majority of people want in regards to public education.
72 out of the 95 counties actually school boards wrote resolutions against the voucher program last time.
Commissioner David Sharp said that some people don't understand the needs of children who rely on federal funding from the U.S. Department of Education.
One man's waste is another child's treasure.
He said cutting that funding would make those children go without access to some resources.
States like Tennessee, who heavily rely upon federal funding from other states, will be significantly impacted in a negative way.
Sharp said proper planning prevents poor performance, but in regards to preparing for the Department of Education's questionable future,
I don't think there's been any planning here at all.
And welcome back to Crisis in the Classroom, particularly in Nashville and Chattanooga. Let me start with you, Mrs. Bush. How does dismantling the Department of Education harm students, but also may benefit students?
Well, first and foremost, I do not agree with dismantling the Department of Education, right? For years, this is what's been put in place. Even when you and I and JC, we were young, this was always put in place in order for us to have the proper funding, especially for public schools, in order for our students to be able to progress. It is an absolutely a disaster to do exactly what's happening right now. There's no benefit to it at all, zero. It is going to harm kids with disabilities. We have so many children now that are being diagnosed on the spectrum of autism. I see it every single day. I have daycares because between 0 and 5, that's when we are able to identify those children early on and the supports they need in order to be successful adults. So this is going to be a big problem, not just for the state of Tennessee. It's going to be a problem across this country that we are already poorly educating our children, and therefore we are not being productive. We're going to fail the children, and we're dumbing the children down, as JC talked about, as far as the Common Core. I mean, so it's going to be a disaster for our future gens, and then we're going to be responsible for that.
Well,
and that's what's
can
going to
it
happen.
be any worse of a disaster than what we're seeing now with the limited government oversight capabilities, students failing all across the country? Even places like Massachusetts that once had, and Connecticut, which were the envy of the country, they're failing with these kids in math and reading. Are you telling me it could not get any worse? So what do you do if the government is running the Department of Education now? Many people advocate that it's better if it's given to the state, because the state knows exactly what their students, the teacher, and the classroom needs. JC?
Yeah, well, and if that's the case, to your point, go on. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Ms. Bush. Go ahead, JC.
No, one of the things I've been an advocate for about 30 plus years has been to block grant the money to the states with accountability by the federal government. And what I mean by that is exactly part of what Fran had said, talking about special needs kids, Title I kids, free and reduced lunch, which, by the way, comes from the Department of Agriculture. I understand that. But the dollars that they come into, and I'll be honest, Title IX is where we've played volleyball with this, starting with the Biden administration, really took it off the rails and took it in a direction it was never intended to go. But that in itself, they have been playing volleyball with this, and each administration that comes in changes the rules. That is not fair to the states. at least we could get some consistency and some development in what we're doing. Yes, there needs to be accountability. We need to make sure children are not being, I think it's discrimination that could be taking place. We need to make sure that's not going to happen. We need to have some kind of accountability on that. And the state can say they're going to do it, but we need to have a check and a balance to make sure they are in fact doing it. So there'll be some role for the federal government, but it will be limited. And again, I will say this, Armstrong, I don't think anybody's going to miss 4,000 bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
So, Ms. Bush, as I was saying before I decided to direct it to JC, I mean, look at the dismal results now. I mean, look at what's happening to these kids. I mean, look at what happens when they don't get an education and they leave schools and you pass them because they're stuck in a certain grade and you don't want them there anymore. You just pass them. These kids, it leads to crime, it leads to incarceration, sexual trafficking, low self-esteem. These kids don't have the skills for the jobs, the technological jobs that are available today. I understand that you don't want to shut it down, but has it earned the respect to stay open without being shuttering?
Well, it did, right? It did right before COVID. The answer to this was COVID. This is where we started to see a problem with the education progress of our children. When we shut the city down and we shut the schools down for a year, absolutely, this is the outcome. I've always said it, I'll never retract it because I know exactly what happened because I was on the school board. I was the only school board to push these children back into the classroom because I saw what it was doing to these children mentally, emotionally, physically. So COVID is the problem. That's where we saw the problems. And that's the reason why the children are having a hard time. As to JC's point, we're talking about it, reading, writing, the basics that they missed. And so you have to think about the kindergartens who was in that era during COVID, right? They didn't get any of their basics. So now we're playing catch up. So what you're seeing right now is playing catch up from COVID. And I said it, it's going to take years for us to rebound from that. However, we still need to continue the path of making sure that we're still funneling the funds into our education system, and especially with those that need all the support that we need right now. And that will stem from COVID.
JC?
Yeah, I agree with that because I think one of the things that has come out was that the federal dollars did make a difference. The dollars, but the federal government itself did very little to oversee that. Now, let me take you to Tennessee. The one thing that we found was some of those dollars never actually reached some of the counties and places that they were supposed to go to in Tennessee. I point to Warren County, for example. They didn't get their dollars, my understanding. And so there's places that the money rolled out slower. It didn't do the work that it needed to do. We did come up with some good programs like tutoring, but those are going away. And those federal dollars are now gone.
You know what's interesting, Ms. Bush, is that the Department of Education had this split off in 1979 to manage programs that were already congressionally mandated. And so its tasks are quite limited, especially because education in our country is largely funded in states and on the local level.
We're talking about the states running and mandating funds for our education system, right? So everybody can manage their own. The problem that I always have, just like I said when I was on the school board, we were never proactive, we were always reactive, right? If this is where we're gonna go and this is what's gonna happen, then we have to have a plan. Right now, the state has no plan. No one has a plan because this is all happening before us and it's all breaking down before us, right? So we have to now figure it out. We have to figure out how we're going to continue to educate our children, continue to make sure that all the support is in place for our children in order for them to be successful adults. Right now, if we're on the path of what we're doing right now, then we're failing. We're failing. We're going to continue to fail the children. So we have to figure it out and we have to have a plan.
You know, JC, you actually think you can lay all the failures of education, Department of Education, at the foot of the pandemic?
Oh, I wouldn't do that. No, I think the failures have been long coming. And I go back to NAEP, Mr. Williams. I say this, that if you look at our NAEP scores historically, since 1970, they've been pretty much flatlined across the board. Now, that's both good and bad. It means really, technically, they're a little bit up. I think 8 points in math and a few in reading. So we have gotten better over time, but it's been pretty stagnant across the straight across the board, and since 1970. And I would say that the federal government. I want to say this about Tennessee. I'm not convinced that the Tennessee Department of Education is quite capable of handling the workload of all the money of $1.1 billion coming down and managing it. I would trust the state more than I would the federal government, but I'm not sure that they're capable of handling it. But all of our issues that we've had in education have been slowly evolving. And I would say, if you go all the way back to when Sputnik happened and the federal government and Eisenhower got involved, some of those issues it relieved the pressure from the locals of being responsible for their own children. And I think that's been, we'll let the federal government spend money. We'll do some things like that.
If the Department of Education closes, what impact will this have for special ed kids in Nashville and Chattanooga? We'll look into that next. Stay with Crisis in the Classroom. Will the Department of Education closing, and what does that mean for our Tennessee schools and students? We will tackle that topic as we continue our crisis in the classroom. We examine President Trump's plan to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education, a process already underway in your nation's capital. Some are questioning how this would affect special needs students, most of whom rely on federal funding. Fox 17 News' Amanda Chen get reactions from some of the stakeholders, including some parents, particularly those worried about their kids.
There are a lot of answers special education families are looking for, but the former Assistant Commissioner of Special Populations for the Tennessee Department of Education says while the rights and protections of students with disabilities are protected by federal law, it's a matter of what authority the federal government would continue to have along with local authority. Elise Masheri has 3 boys. One is autistic and dyslexic. He relies on federal funding through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA, to help him get the support and services he needs at school.
If this is taken away and it's left up to the states, how are you going to support my kids? Where is the accountability going to be?
President Donald Trump says he plans to shut down the Department of Education. So what will happen to this IDEA funding? According to a special education support organization, Tennessee STEP, around 130,000 Tennessee families rely on special education services.
What we're not sure of is without the enforcement, without the guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed, what do states need to be doing? What do they need to be looking at?
Teresa Nichols is the former Assistant Commissioner for Special Populations for the Tennessee Department of Education.
What we're not sure right now is if the U.S. Department of Ed is not the agency that's sending those funds, who is going to do that?
GOP Congressman John Rose represents parts of Middle Tennessee and thinks dismantling the department is a good idea.
Places like Tennessee will be able to make decisions that make sense for our students and for our teachers and our parents and families that serve our state's interests and do so in an economical fashion.
Representative Rose believes that accountability and oversight should fall on the states, or perhaps some function would migrate into another department.
I think you'll see some of that funding continue, but I think it'll be more focused. It will be administered through block grant programs where states are allowed to make their own decisions about how to use the funds most effectively.
Nichols says she's gotten a lot of questions from families in Tennessee. Her message to these families: stay vigilant, stay informed, and don't panic. Reporting in the studio, I'm Amanda Chen, Fox 17 News, your Code Red station.
Let me start with you, Mrs. Bush, as we talk about the closing of the Department of Education and the impact that it has on special needs. Part of the issue is that special needs kids require a lot of attention. I have a special needs brother, so I know firsthand. I've lived with this all my life. And it requires patience. It requires skills. It requires empathy. And you can have as many Department of Educations as you want, but if you don't have the right people, taking care of these special needs out of love and compassion, and the fact that it could be them or their loved one, not much is going to change.
Correct. I mean, you're right. And that's the reason why it's so important that we give the support we need and the funding we need in order to support, children and young people that have special needs. I mean, we're doing the best we can because, of course, we also are dealing with teacher shortages, right? This is another topic that do the work for our children every day that have special needs. And as you heard me tell you earlier, that because I work with children, younger children between that 0 to 5, a lot of these children, there's a huge uptick as far as children that are on the spectrum, autism, other areas of supports they need as far as disabilities. So if we stand back and don't put the funds into our special education funds and financials that we need to in order to make sure that if a state is going to run, this area of education, that has to be a priority. It's just like everything else. So we have to have people, to your point, that are compassionate, that understand patients, that understand the kind of care that these children need. And without that, we're going to fail at that also.
Mr. Bowman, what happens to federal funding for special education services, including the IDEA Part B grant, if the department is shut down? And what states would states be required to continue providing these services at the same level? Because certainly we know these standards could drop.
In Tennessee, the answer is yes. Very briefly, let me clear that up, because a few years ago, Tennessee went back and basically mirrored the federal law in Tennessee. We brought it down and put it in state law. So the state would have to follow many of the same things. The problem is, obviously, they could change that. So there would be a fear that could change once people see that the amount of money that's being spent. We were supposed to get about 44% of the money from the federal government on special ed. They've only spent between 10 to 15% of that money has come down. So it's been a problem with the amount of money from the federal government to fund special ed already. I'm a former special ed teacher, and I say that, and I don't say that to get any kudos from anybody, because I'll tell you what, it is one of the highest turnover rates, and I myself left and went to social studies and other courses that I taught. But it takes a special calling because of not only do you teach all day, you're working with kids that are, sometimes it's challenging. You're dealing with parents and trying to explain to them how they can help their child at home. But the second and most important part of this is that when you get there, you're not getting support from other faculty members when you want to include kids. I mean, I was early on when we were bringing kids into inclusion, I was working on that to get kids in the regular classroom. And it was very difficult to find, regular teachers that wanted special needs kids in their classroom. And it's really a sad situation. So we need to make sure that the federal, that's what I'm talking about, making sure the federal government really verifies, trust but verify, and make sure that these kids are getting the services they're supposed to get.
Ms. Bush, I must tell you, raising 5 sons, being on the school board, running for office, it has certainly prepared you for your role. And we need more voices like you in the world. And JC, I mean, your fight as professional for the professional educators, all this stuff happens in concert. And, we got to fight for these kids, because yet by the grace of God goes us, because they are our future. And we're fighting for America every day when we fight for them. So I cannot salute you enough for what you do. Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Crisis in the Classroom. And we look forward to having you back in our Tennessee studios. As Nashville schools navigate rising costs, literacy levels, and safety issues, the pressure on students, teachers, and families continues to mount. These issues will invariably have hit Tennessee's most vulnerable children the hardest. With achievement gaps stubbornly wide and the future of education at stake, The decisions made in the coming months will shape Nashville and Chattanooga's classrooms and its communities for years to come. Thank you for joining us on Crisis in the Classroom, Tennessee. I'm Armstrong Williams.